So today we're taking off out of Monterey.
Out of Monterey?
So Monterey is I'm not going to tell you actually. It does say it on the screen. But what kind of airspace is Monterey? It does say it, so you can look.
C.
Yeah, it's a Charlie. It is a class Charlie. So as a very, very quick review of airspace, you got the class Charlie of the outer shelf and you got the inner shelf. And again, class Charlies usually go up to about 4,000 feet AGL. So this goes up to 4,200. That's just because the airport that it's centered around, the elevation's about 200. So it's 4,000 feet AGL, 4,200 MSL. So if you were flying on the altimeter, you would see 4,200. It starts at 1,500 feet. So below 1,500, you're not in the Charlie. Over here, it starts at 2,500 feet. So anything below that, you're not in the Charlie. But you might be about to hit a mountain. So, you don't want to be too low. And then in the inner shelf, it starts at the surface level, up to 4,200. So we're in a Charlie. What do we know about Charlie airspace? What do we remember?
You have to talk.
Gotta talk. What equipment do you need to get into a Charlie?
ADSB.
ADSB and one more.
The Sentry, but it's not the Sentry.
ADSB and the Mode C transponder. Mode C just means that ATC can see your altitude. So Mode C transponder, ADSB, you have to be talking. So we're going to start here on the ground. And one of the first things I'll do if I'm taking off out of an airport, maybe I'm not super familiar with, is I'm going to look at the airport diagram. Now I have a layer that's on right now where the airport diagram just shows up on the map. But the real airport diagram on ForeFlight would be under procedure and then just under airport diagram. So this tells you all the information about the runway, the different taxiways, kind of where everything is in terms of like where you would go park. So we're going to say, let's see, the runways you have are 28 right and 28 left. And then you have 10 left and 10 right. They're parallel runways. They're right next to each other. They both face the same direction. One is obviously shorter. You have a 7,175 foot runway. That's 28 left and 10 right. 150 feet wide. So McClellan's runway is also 150 feet wide. McClellan is longer though. But this is still a long runway. And then you have the shorter runway, which is 3,500 feet long and 60 feet wide. So significantly shorter and smaller. What was I going to mention? This is a regional airport, so you have airlines flying in here. Like smaller airlines, like SkyWest will fly in there. So if you see like United Express or American Eagle, those are all CRJ, ERJ, like 50 to 70 passenger jets, they can fly into Monterey, and they do a lot. You also have a lot of like private jet, charter types of airplanes. So usually they will go and park in the terminal. Where's the hangars? Military ramp. Oh, there's the terminal. So there's the terminal. So you wouldn't go there as general aviation. We're general aviation, so we would go over here. So this is the jet center. And then I don't know why, but I don't think it's on here. Let's see. Okay, you have the jet center and you have Del Monte Aviation. Those are the two FBOs at Monterey. So you can go here or you can go here. We're considered general aviation. We're going to say we're at Del Monte Aviation because I personally love Del Monte. So we're going to be over here. What I like to do, if I don't know the airport, is on ForeFlight, I go to the layers up here, and I'll take off the VFR sectional layer and the aeronautical layer, and I'll do the aerial map. Now I can see it as if, like I was looking at Google Maps, for example. So here we are at Del Monte Aviation. Ooh. So there's Del Monte right there. So we would be parked probably somewhere along here because that's where all the other planes that look like ours are. They like to put the jets up front because they're the ones that make that FBO money because of fuel. So you would probably park right over here. Somebody would come out and they would marshal you. You know, they would direct you to park wherever, over here somewhere. And then you'd walk over to Del Monte and, you know, check in your plane, ask for fuel, get a rental car, things like that. So we're going to pretend that we're here. So we're going to pull out. We're going to be taxiing. We're going to get in the plane. And we're going to pretend that we're getting ready to take off back to McClellan. We're starting off at Del Monte. Let me call the weather so we can listen to the weather. So let's pretend we already pre-flighted. We're getting in the plane. We've started the plane. And now we're going to listen to the weather because we cannot taxi until we ask permission from the tower. It would actually be the ground control, but sometimes they're the same person. But you have a tower controller who controls who's landing and taking off. You have the ground controller who's handling anybody that's taxiing or any vehicles like fuel trucks and such. So we will call their weather. We'll pretend we're in the plane and that we're listening to the weather on the headset. Very spirited. Wow.
RNAV Zulu approach, not authorized. ILS or localized runway 10 right. Autopilot couple approach, not authorized.
I'm gonna start over.
Monterey Regional Airport. Automated weather observation 2254 Zulu. Wind 280 at 11. Visibility 10. Sky condition clear. Temperature 16 Celsius. Dew point 08 Celsius. Altimeter 3000. Remarks. Density altitude 400.
Monterey Tower operations are suspended from 2100 to 0600 local time. The Columbia traffic advisory frequency is 118.4. Pilot operated approach lighting and runway 10 right, 28 left pilot operated lighting are available on 118.4. Contact NorCal approach on 133.5 from 2100 to 0600 local time for clearances or release times and to report cancellation. Notice, Monterey Southeast ramp closed. RNAV Zulu approach not authorized. ILS or localized runway 10 right. Autopilot couple approach not authorized.
Okay, so he's talking about the NOTAMs, notices to air missions. So the tower's closed right now, but we're going to pretend that it's still open for the sake of this exercise. But anyway, the tower's closed, so that's why we're not getting the ATIS. It could just be a weekend thing, or who knows? They closed for various reasons. It could be something like they're getting the tower renovated or something. But we got the important information. We got 280 at 11. That's the wind. So what runway are we using? Are we using 10 or 28?
0.
Do we take off into the wind or?
Taking off into the wind.
Yeah, so the wind's coming from 280.
So we're going to go.
Which runway?
So you want to go 10.
10 would be a tailwind.
One more.
So you want to take off of 28. So whatever runway is closest to the wind, that's the one you choose. So because you want to take off into the wind's coming from 280. So when you line up on runway 28, you are lined up on 280 of a heading, which is where the wind's coming from. You are heading into 280.
That makes sense.
Okay, perfect.
I was thinking that you're lined up, like where 28 is.
Oh, yes. No, you're facing 28.
Facing 28.
Yeah, you're when you take off, you're going 280, that direction.
Got it.
The visibility is 10 miles, so skies are clear, and skies are clear. The temperature is 16, dew point 08, a nice far spread, so I'm not expecting any fog. The altimeter is 3000, so high pressure. Okay, cool. And the density altitude is 400. So the elevation at Monterey is 250 something, 257 feet. So the density altitude being 400, that just tells me, okay, it's pretty cool outside. And standard temperature at sea level is 15. So it's just a little bit warm. But otherwise, it's pretty standard and just high pressure. So we got the weather. And then I would be like, okay, so we're going to use 2.8. I would prefer the longer runway, just, because why not? So I want to be on which runway was longer, which would be 2.8 left. So here's 2.8 left. There's 2.8 right. That's a little itty bitty thing. I want to do 2.8 left. I could specifically request it. Most likely, Tower would just give it to us anyway, because if we're parked on this side, it would just be easier for everybody just to put me on the runway that's closer. But you could request it specifically. So what I would say is I would contact ground because we're taxiing. I would tell them Monterey Ground, Cessna 61329er at Del Monte with the 1-minute weather, ready to taxi for a departure back to McClellan, requesting 2.8 left. Then they would come back and they would be like, Cessna 61329er, Monterey Ground, 2.8 left approved, taxi 2.8 left via. Then they're going to tell us the taxiways. So we can go back to the airport diagram. And before I would even taxi, I would kind of try to guess the direction they're going to give me, which if we're over here at General Aviation, it's probably going to be via Alpha all the way down. So that's a pretty easy one. Maybe Alpha November, or just maybe Alpha all the way down. And you can accept an intersection takeoff if you're confident, because obviously if you take off from Lima, you don't have the whole 7,175 feet. You have about half of that, or I guess a little bit more than half of that. But you're cutting off a chunk of the runway, which you totally can do. Not saying you can't. But just know your own limits. Like I probably wouldn't do, you could technically do Kilo. Kilo's about halfway, so you could do that. But I probably wouldn't. I probably wouldn't accept anything past Lima, just because if I have this big old runway, I might as well use it.
And are you doing your run up right here? Yeah.
Yep.
That's what I was saying.
Usually when there's like a wider area on the taxiway, that's usually the run up area. So they would probably say Cessna 61329er, Monterey Ground, 2.8 left approved, taxi 2.8 left via Alpha. And then we would say 2.8 left via Alpha 61329er. So we would come and taxi and we would go and we would turn right on Alpha. And we would just take Alpha all the way down. And again, we're going to pass by all these regional jets that are going to be parked here at the terminal. This is the military, I believe. They have a ramp here, and I think that's also another ramp for them. So we're taking Alpha all the way down until we get to the run-up area. And it says ATC non-visibility area. That just means the tower cannot see you when you're over there. So just be aware, if your plane's on fire, they can't see that. So they just can't see you over there.
Are the circles on 2.8 left, or the two ellipticals, are those where the Vassy and the Poppy is?
Good question. So where the Vassies and the Pappies would be, if they had them on this chart, why don't they have them on the chart? Usually they would, because I do believe they have Pappies. Let me look at the ForeFlight diagram. ForeFlight does their own kind of diagram. The one we were looking at was the FAA specific one. You can look at both, but it looks like neither of them have that on there. But what those circles are, is what you're talking about. Yeah. That is a displaced threshold. So what that means is over here, it's a very small one. You'll notice that 2.8 left, the threshold does not begin at the beginning of the concrete. You have these arrows right here. You can taxi and take off on those, but you cannot land on them. Why they usually do that is because there's probably some obstacles in the way over here to where if you were planning to land on the numbers over here on this part of the runway, you might hit something. There might not be enough clearance for you to be able to land here, but there's enough clearance for you to land here. That's why you can taxi, take off, but you can't land on it. The chevrons can't taxi, can't take off, can't land on them. The chevrons are no-go. Usually what they do that for is because for the jets, when they do takeoffs, they need to give some space for the blast from the air, from the engines. So that's like a blast area, blast pad kind of thing. So that's a displaced threshold, which is depicted with these little circles, these little ovals up here too. Okay, so then here we are. This is your, this is taxiway Alpha right here. I'm just going to point out some other airport markings and signs that I think are important. So there's something called a movement area and a non-movement area, and they usually just have them at busy airports, such as Monterey. By movement, I mean, if it's a non-movement area, this means that you don't necessarily have to talk to air traffic control to taxi on it. And so like right in this area, right here, all along here, you can taxi through here without talking to ATC. So a lot of vehicles, you know, like the fuel trucks, they'll be taxiing, golf carts will be taxiing, or I'm sorry, driving, all in this area right here because they don't have to talk to ATC to do that. Once you cross, oh, let me zoom in. Okay. Once you cross this line, and I'll show you, maybe I'll just do a little picture so you can actually see it close up. So it looks like that up close. So this is your safe side, aka like you can taxi without, I'm sorry, the non-movement areas on the solid side and the movement areas on the dashed side. That is wrong, this one. So movement area, you're taxiing, talking to ATC. Non-movement area, you're not talking to ATC, but you can taxi. ATC is not controlling you on this side. And then here you have a hold short line. So you cannot cross this line. Like if you were to taxi to take off right here, cannot cross that line until ATC clears you to take off. If you're landing, you want to cross that line and get off because until you cross this line, you're not technically clear of the runway. So once you get off, now you're officially clear. If you're hanging out right here, it's technically a runway incursion. What a runway incursion is you're an improper presence on the runway. So if they tell you to get off the runway, you need to cross the hold short line. And if you're telling them that you're holding short, that means that you're just waiting right here or on whatever hold short taxiway you're on. But anyway, we are taxiing down Alpha, and we're going all the way to the run-up area. So here's the run-up area. So you would just taxi like right over here, park the plane, do all of your run-up. So a quick review of the run-up. Run-up checklist, you have the brakes set. Check the fuel in the Cessna 150. The fuel is in between the seats. Fuel should be on, which means it should be pointing at you. If it wasn't on, you would probably shut down already. But fuel should be on. We're going to trim for takeoff. So the trim wheel, which is right in front in the middle of the panel, you're going to make sure that all of those white lines are matched up for neutral, for takeoff position. Flight controls, you're going to make sure that they're free and correct. You're going to grab the yoke. Here's what I do. I turn it all the way to the left. Make sure that aileron goes up. Remember, down is up. If you're putting the aileron down that way, that side should go up. So that aileron should go up. I pull it all the way back. The elevator should be lifting up. I turn it all the way to the right. That aileron should go up, and then the elevator should still be up. Push it down. Elevator should be down, back into neutral. Nothing is blocking me on the yoke. You know, sometimes you have a passenger, their knees get in the way. So I always, before I do the flight control check, I'm like, watch your knees, and then I do it. Make sure everything's out of the way. My knee board's not in the way. Nothing is preventing me from making the full movement. So flight controls are free and correct. Instruments, okay, make sure the altimeter is set on the altimeter setting is on the altimeter. And the altimeter should be reading within 75 feet of field elevation, which in this case is 257. So if the altimeter was reading 400 feet, I would know, okay, the altimeter is off. So what I would do is I would just set the altimeter until it read field elevation. That way I'm getting a more accurate reading. Maybe, could be the weather station is just like not accurate. That's happened before. It happens. So when in doubt, you set the altimeter to the field elevation. Make sure, your airspeed should be reading 0. Your VSI, vertical speed indicator, should also be reading 0. I wish I could like transfer that over here with the panel. Let's see. I'll just point at them. Okay, no, not these ones because those are not right. So that should be indicating 0, airspeed indicator. Altimeter or VSI should be indicating 0. Altimeter should be within 75 feet of the field elevation. You want to make sure the horizontal indicator, the heading indicator, should be matched up with the compass. So those two should be aligned. And then you kind of mostly check this on the taxi. The little airplane should turn in the way that you're turning on when you're taxiing. And the attitude indicator, as long as it's up and erect, brown over or blue over brown, you're good to go. Okay, we checked those instruments, so that's the 6-pack, so that all looks good. Mixture you're gonna put in for best power. Since we're at sea level and it's not that hot, I'm gonna put the mixture all the way in. Normally you lean it for taxi. Do you remember why you lean it for taxi?
So you don't flood it.
Yeah, so you don't flood it. You don't need so much fuel in the engine because you're at a low power setting. You're just taxiing. So you lean it, and then you're going to do the run up. So you're going to put the mixture back all the way in because you're going to increase the power setting. Then you're going to check the magneto. Oh, I'm sorry, it's 1700 RPM. And then make sure the primer is in and locked. Just give it a little wiggle. 1700 RPM. Now you're going to check the mag. So you're going to grab the key. How I do it is I check the right mag first. So I do 2 clicks to the right side. What should you see on the RPMs? Should drop. Okay, there's a drop. Shouldn't be more than like 150. Okay, go back to both. Let the RPMs rise again. Then check the left mag. Should also drop. No more than 150 of a drop. And no more than a 50 RPM difference between the two. So if one drops like 60 and then the other one drops 150, that's too big of a gap. If you have a bad mag, don't go. So we check the mags. Let's say they're running great. Carb heat test. What do we do with that? Pull it out. What should you see with the RPMs? Correct. You should see a drop in RPMs. Why?
Because the air is like hotter, so it's less dense.
Exactly. You're introducing hot air into the engine, which is less dense, so the engine should have a drop in RPM. Check the vacuum. Should be around 5 inches of mercury, so it's between the 4 and the 6. Amps and volts should be indicating a charge, usually at a higher RPM setting. If it's indicating a discharge, you have a problem. Oil pressure, oil temperature, both gauges should be in the green. Sometimes when it's cold, the oil temperature takes a while. Just leave it at 1700 RPM and let it get warm. Throttle or idle, check close. So you should do this with the carb heat on because when you're landing with the carb heat on, and sometimes you do a power off landing. So you want to make sure the engine won't shut down with the carb heat on and at idle. So carb heat is still on, pull out the throttle all the way to idle. Engine should idle, but it should not quit. Okay, put the carb heat in, put the throttle back to 1000. Check the throttle friction, that little wheel at the base of the throttle. Make sure, everything's flowing smoothly. Okay, run up is complete. Pre-takeoff, we'll do 0 flaps. Mixture, best power. I'm going to leave it all the way in because we are at sea level and it's not very hot outside. Carb heat should be off. Pitot heat should be off because we're not flying in clouds or in rain. Heading to compass, we already did that before taxi, but we'll double check. Heading and indicator should match the compass. Doors and windows are locked. Make sure they are locked. Windows are closed. XBDR, alt squawk, means transponder. So put the transponder to alt. And you should be squawking probably 1200. Put the landing light on, put the strobes on, note the time, okay, it's 4:26, and then brakes release, and then you have an abort plan. So, make sure I covered everything that the ACS wanted me to cover. Some other airport markings before we get into our takeoff that I'm going to point out. So you got 28 left, obviously right here. Here's your threshold. Here's your 500-foot markers. Not every airport has these, but bigger airports do. McClellan does. So you have 500-foot markers. That's 500 feet away from the beginning of the runway. And then you got 1,000-foot markers. Then after that, you got 1,500, 2,000, and then it just tapers off and it's gone. So up until this point, from the threshold up until here, this is called the touchdown zone. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of like tire markings around here. So they're just saying, this is about, in this area, this is where you're going to touch down. If you follow the PAPIs, the precision approach path indicators, or if you're on the instrument approach, you will touch down somewhere here. So you have plenty of runway remaining. So, you know, you're not, landing distance is not critical. Displaced threshold, we talked about that. You have the runway directions here. So when you see these signs, just think of it as the threshold is on this side for 28 left, and the threshold for 10 right is on the other side. So if you wanted to go to 10 right, you would go to the left. If you wanted to go to 28 left, you would go to the right. So they're just pointing out, hey, the threshold for this runway is over here, and the threshold for that runway is over there. Here's your hold short line. Here's your another hold short line. All right. And if you were taxiing at night, I'd have the landing light and the taxi light on just so you can see. I would taxi a little slower because you have less visibility at night, so I would taxi slower. I would probably turn off my strobes because they can be very blinding, especially to other aircraft, especially if they're coming into land. You don't want to blind somebody. So I would turn off the strobes. Just extra considerations I would make for at nighttime. Before I take off. As long as no one's on final approach and I'm about to take off, I would turn it back on. It's just a courteous thing. Visual indicators for the wind. Can I see? You know, usually you'll see wind socks, but I don't know if you can really see them on here. Yeah, I can't really see them, but usually they have them at the very beginning, and depending on how long the runway is, they'll have one like at the beginning and one in the middle. But I cannot see one. But you can look for wind socks, but we already checked the weather, so we'll just use that. We completed the appropriate checklists using the airport diagram to taxi. So whether you're using ForeFlight on here or if you print out an airport diagram and bring it with you, just so you know, all of the taxiway designations, different types of runways, where to park, all of that. Confirmation or expectation bias as related to taxi instructions. So we were expecting to taxi on Alpha to 28 left just because we requested it. There could be a reason that we don't know that ATC would be like, I can't put you on 28 left. And they have to put us on 28 right. So then they'd have to give us taxiway instructions to go to 28 right. So you want to kind of plan where you want to go, but don't do it to the point where you're blocking out any other information that comes in. And don't be like, well, if I don't hear them say 28 left via Alpha, then I have no idea what they're saying. You want to like kind of prepare, but not to the point where you're not flexible anymore. And then I don't think this airport diagram has one. There's something called hotspots. And usually what will happen is it'll be like circled in orange and it'll say HS on it. So what a hotspot is a place that, you know, it's a very busy intersection and it would be like for taxiways. So like, for example, this potentially could be a hotspot right here because you have Bravo, you have Echo, and you have Golf. You have a bunch of different taxiways intersecting. you could possibly hit another aircraft or a vehicle in that area. So it's not designated as a hotspot though, so I guess it's not technically considered one.
Yeah, like the blind spots also hot spots too.
Not like an official hotspot, like a blind spot, like if you're sitting in the plane and you can't see like behind you.
ATC can't see you, like the run up over by.
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. You could kind of consider that as well because people, who knows, like if ATC can't see them, maybe they're not paying attention to where you are, and also there's probably going to be other aircraft in that area. So yeah, you can kind of consider that as a hotspot as well. A bunch of taxiway intersections, especially if there's like a taxiway intersection, like if you had to you have to cross Lima and then you got to cross Lima again to even get over to the parking on this side. So like Lima could be a potential hotspot, but again, neither of them are marked, so they're not official hotspots. It'll say HS on it and be circled in orange.
That's not a little end stop over there, is it?
Where?
By 347.
Oh, that is an obstacle. So they're just saying, hey, there's a little obstacle right here, and it's 347 feet MSL.
What's the deal with the military?
They just don't want you to park there unless you're military. It could be like Coast Guard or something. Yeah, so like Coast Guard will park there.
It's just like military parking.
Yep. Yeah. Military only. If you ever have to cross a runway, you'll get taxed. Like if you landed on 28 right or 10 left and you wanted to go to Del Monte to park. Let's say you land on 28 right and then you land kind of long and you come all the way to Lima. You might hear them say like 61329er, turn left on Lima, cross 28 left, and taxi to parking via Lima Alpha. Okay, they told you that you can cross. So yes, you can, as soon as you get onto Alpha from 28 right, you can go ahead and cross 28 left. Always double check though. Always look both ways. Don't trust anybody. Take your time as you taxi, look right, look left, and then you can cross. And if you see something like a vehicle or another airplane, then you don't cross.
So you don't need to get secondary permission once you get to it left.
As long as he said cross 28 left, taxi to parking via Lima Alpha, you can cross. But if you're not sure, you can always ask. You can be like, 613 Monterey Tower, 61329er, I just want to confirm I can cross 28 left. They can't get mad at you. And they'll be like, affirmative, cross 28 left, taxi to parking via Lima Alpha. Okay, cross 28 left, taxi to parking, Lima Alpha, 61329er. I've done that before where I'm like, did he say me to cross? I'm just going to ask. And most of the time they're like, thank you for checking. Because the last thing I want to do is cause an accident. And unfortunately, I trust nobody. So even if I'm cleared, I will always double check visually to make sure that I'm clear. So sometimes people will cross 16 and 34 at McClellan because they go to the self-serve fuel pump and then they want to taxi kind of towards the jet center and then go taxi to 16. So you'll hear them say like holding short of 16 at Kilo. And then when they clarify or when they confirm no one's coming, they'll be like crossing 1634 at Kilo to Foxtrot. And then once they get on Foxtrot and they clear the runway past the hold short line, they'll say so-and-so clear of 1634 on Foxtrot, taxiing run up 16. So if you're at a non-towered airport, tell people that you're holding short, tell people you're crossing, tell people when you're clear. Clear of the runway, taxiing to the run up 16. But otherwise, tower will clear you or not clear you. What they could say is they could say, exit 28 right on Lima, hold short 28 left. Okay, exit 28 right on Lima, hold short 28 left. So you would hold right here. Somebody's probably taking off or landing. Once they're out of the way, then ATC would be like, 61329er, cross 28 left, taxi to parking via Lima Alpha. Cross 28 left, Lima Alpha parking, 61329er. So if they say hold short, they're telling you do not cross the runway. They're telling you to hold behind that dashed yellow and solid yellow line. So like these ones right here. Anything else that the ACS would like me to go over? Cool. Did the before takeoff check. We did all of our run-up. Some things that happen when you're on taxi that could distract you. You drop things. You drop your iPad. You drop your pen. If you drop your iPad and it has your taxi diagram on it and you need it, okay, stop the plane, put your feet on the brakes, grab your iPad, make sure it's all settled, and then go. Don't be taxiing and then, scrambling around looking for your iPad, looking for your pen as you're moving. Stop the plane. If ATC has a problem with it, then they'll let you know. But you can be like, sorry, I dropped my iPad, and literally just say that. And they'll be like, okay. People, you might be flying with loved ones or with friends, and because you're not doing takeoff or landing, they might not know, and they might be talking to you. Well, you need to be listening to the ground frequency, just in case they say something, because what could happen is you could be taxiing right about here, and then somebody had landed and they're told to clear right here, and they could tell you, hold short of taxiway, whatever this is, for exiting traffic. And if you don't hear that, that could be a problem. So they'll say stuff like that. So they'll say, hold short of Juliet for the for the traffic exiting the runway, hold short of hotel for traffic exiting the runway, just things like that. Or sometimes they'll tell them to hold short for you. They'll say, like, if it's a jet, they'll be like, hey, citation such and such, hold short of taxiway Alpha for the Cessna 150 taxiing, and then they gotta hold for you. So you could do that. So that could happen too. Unexpected runway changes by ATC happens rarely, but it does happen. So, you could be in the run-up area. You can be like, I'm ready for departure. And they're like, actually, I need you to take off of 28 right. Okay. So then they would tell you, hold short of 28 left on November. You say, hold short 28 left on November. And then they'll say, 6139er, cross 28 left on November, hold short 28 right. Cross 28 left at November, hold short 28 right. So now you're taxiing across this way and you're holding here. And then this is kind of the beginning of 28 right. So they might be like, do you want the full length or can you take off on November? That's completely up to you. If you need the full length, they're going to make you cross the runway and then go to Charlie.
What if you've already passed November? Would they make you go down the runway, or would you turn around on taxiway Alpha?
Well, so I'm saying you would be here and then they change you to 28 right. So you'd already be on November. But if you landed on 28 right and they wanted you to somehow make November, unable. And they're going to have to wait for you to get to, Mike or Lima or the very end.
Would they ever change your runway before you got to the
run-up?
Yeah, to the run-up. Well,
possibly.
After you got to the run-up. So if you're at the run-up now, and you more or less kind of past November, would they take you to Alpha?
Oh, okay. Like you got over here?
Yeah. And would they take you to 28 left and then back to November, right on November?
They could. Yeah, they could say taxi on to 28 left and exit on November. So they could do that. Or the taxiways are very large. They could say, hey, can you make a 180? Like, hey, can you turn the plane around on Alpha and then go back to November? Probably. Okay. Or if you're not comfortable, like unable, they'll be like, okay, go ahead and enter 28 left, taxi onto 28 left, exit on November. So you could do that too. Or they could do that and tell you to do that. In which case, you are now on an active runway, so you look both ways. Wake turbulence. So you're at an airport with a bunch of jets. They're landing, they're taking off. They are generating very large wingtip vortices, high pressures flowing the low pressure air in a spiral behind the plane, and it flows downward. And if the wind is just a straight headwind on 28 left, then in those vortices are just going directly behind them and then down. If the wind is, coming from this side, then the vortices might move this way or they might move this way. But either way, if you're taking off behind a jet, ATC should give you they should give you enough time for those vortices to dissipate. But they will say something like, they'll wait about a minute after that person lands or takes off, and then they'll clear you to take off, and they'll say something like 61329er, clear for takeoff, caution wake turbulence. So they're telling you, hey, wake turbulence is now your responsibility. I did my job, I made you wait. Now you need to make sure like you're within your limitations. If you think that they cleared you to take off too early behind someone else, then you can say unable. I'm going to wait a little bit longer for the wake turbulence. If you want to clear someone else in front of me, go ahead. So when you're taking off behind a jet, you want to take off before their takeoff point, which is typically pretty easy because they take about 3,000 feet at least to take off. You maybe take 1,000 feet to take off. So that shouldn't be a problem, because what would happen is they take off, they generate those vortices, you take off before them, you're going to climb over the vortices. Wake turbulence, you'll be fine. If you're landing behind one of them, you want to touch down after they touch down, because their wake vortices are behind them, so you want to climb on top of them and then descend. You don't want to descend into it. So you take off before, you land after for wake turbulence avoidance. This happens at McClellan a lot too. And we don't have a tower, so you kind of have to space that out yourself. If you give it 2 minutes, you're good to go. Don't let a tower controller try to clear you too early. You just tell them unable due to wake turbulence. And then, you know, if it's a problem, you can be like, well, feel free to clear other people before me. I'm going to wait a little longer. Or if you're feeling confident and you're fine with it, you can be like, well, you can put me on the other runway. I'll go to 28 right so I can avoid that whole thing. You have to talk to ATC. You got to communicate with them. You got to tell them what you need from them. But also, you know, try to offer a compromise, because they've got a job too that they're trying to do. All right, before you do the takeoff, we're going to do a takeoff briefing. Here's the acronym I just kind of teach students is give me the deets. The departure type, where are you going? You're going to McClellan. Okay, McClellan's that way, somewhere. So if I'm taking off of 28 right, I know at some point I would like to turn to the right and then maybe to the right again and head that way towards McClellan, towards Sacramento. So departure type. Okay, here we are, runway 28 left. We're doing the full length. I would like a right turnout over to McClellan. So I'm expecting at some point ATC is going to clear me for a right turnout. I'm going to say right because left over here is a bunch of terrain, so ATC usually will avoid putting anybody over here. So they'll probably clear you. You'll probably fly over the ocean and then turn to the right at some point. If you are at McClellan and you're kind of planning your own departure, well, where are you going? If you're at McClellan, you're going to Marysville. Marysville's also like over here. Like pretend this is McClellan. This is McClellan. Marysville's over here somewhere. If you're taking off of 1-6, I would do a right downwind departure. I would take off. I would climb at least 500 feet, turn a right crosswind, turn a right downwind, and then depart on the downwind leg. You can depart on a downwind, you can depart on a crosswind, you can depart on a 45. Like if I'm on the runway taking off, I could go into the 45 and go this way. It's not quite a crosswind. Crosswind's more of like a direct 90-degree turn. 45 somewhere in between. So you could do that. We're gonna do a right turnout departure over towards McClellan. Expectations: if you're with another pilot, you're with your CFI, you establish with them. I'll be in control of the takeoff. If we're gonna do an exchange of controls, it'll be a 3-step process: your controls, my controls, your controls, or my controls, your controls, my controls. Otherwise, I'll be PIC. I'll handle the communications. I'll handle the takeoff. In an emergency, okay, here we are at Monterey. In the 150, I should have at least 70% of my airspeed by the time I reach 1,000 foot markers. We're looking for rotation speed, which is in the 150, it's about 60 miles per hour, which, let's see what it says on the checklist. VR, which is rotation speed, it's 58 miles per hour, 50 knots, call it 60. Okay, so we should have at least like 40 knots by the time we reach 1,000 foot markers. If we do not, I'm aborting the takeoff. I'll pull out the throttle, I'll get on the brakes, I'll taxi off, we'll communicate to tower what happened. Otherwise, I should be off by the time I reach the second taxiway. I should be airborne by this point. If I am not, something is wrong. I will abort the takeoff at that point as well. So here's my airspeed point, here's my abort point. I guess both are abort points, because if I don't have 40 by this time, I'm aborting. If I'm not airborne by this time, I'm aborting. If I'm up in the air and we have, gauges go into the red, I have loss of RPMs, some kind of engine failure, and I have runway remaining, which I most likely will, I will come back down and land on the same runway, taxi off, let tower know. If I have no runway remaining and I'm in the air, it's going to be shallow turns only. And let's see what is at the end that we could potentially land on. I do believe there's a freeway. There's a freeway, there's a golf course. Worst comes to worst, there's the beach. I will aim for the freeway, I'll aim for the golf course, or if I'm over here, I'm landing on the beach. And I'll do a soft field landing on the beach. If I'm at least 1,000 feet, and this is just for me, for students, I would say if you're at 2,000 feet, you can probably come back around and land on the opposite runway. For me, I'm comfortable at 1,000 feet. If I'm above 1,000 feet in the air over here, I'm going to turn back around and land on 10. For students, again, I'm like, that's a hard turn to do, so I would want you to be higher. And that's the takeoff briefing. You go through different types of emergencies. Anomaly on the takeoff roll when you're not in the air. Anomaly in the air with runway remaining. Anomaly in the air with no runway remaining. And then anomaly in the air above a certain altitude. And if you're with a CFI, you establish, okay, in the case of an emergency, who's in control? You or me? Most of you at first will be like, hey, in an emergency, it's your controls, dude. It's the CFI's controls, for sure. And that should be how it is pretty much until about you solo. Okay, takeoff information. Well, here we are, 28 left. We have 7,175 runway. We did the takeoff performance. It'll take us no more than 1,000 feet to take off. That's pretty much it for the takeoff. Or, hey, we have a crosswind. In this case, we have a direct headwind. It was 280 at like 11 or something. 280 at 11. Okay, we have an 11 knot headwind. So we should actually lift off probably a little bit earlier than what I'm expecting. And then switches, make sure all the lights are on. If you're in the Piper, make sure the fuel pump is on as well. Make sure your seatbelts are on. And then speak up, ask if anyone has any questions.
When should you tell them that it should be a sparrow cockpit except for when you're takeoff, landing, and
I would say before you even get in the plane, before you even start taxiing, I would say, hey, if you're with someone, hey, we're at a Tower Airport, I have to listen to the radio. So until we reach our cruise altitude, which will be 6,500 today, I'm going to ask that you don't say anything. So it's kind of like with in the airlines, and when you reach cruise altitude, now you can move about the cabin. Same thing. Once we're at cruise altitude, you can talk. Otherwise, I'm busy. So give me the deets. That's your departure briefing. Some airspeeds you care about. VR, rotation speed. That's when you pull back and take off. 60 miles per hour. VX and VY. VY is your best rate of climb. VX is your best angle of climb, both of which are on the checklist on the bottom in that little yellow row. VX, best angle, is 61 knots and 70 miles per hour. Best rate is 66 knots and 76 miles per hour. Best rate will give you the most altitude for the least amount of time. That's best rate. Most altitude, least amount of time. VX will give you the best angle, which is the most amount of altitude for the least amount of distance. If you're clearing an obstacle, you use VX. We're not clearing an obstacle today. We got 7,000 feet of runway, so we can climb at VY. VY is a little nicer on the engine. And I climb, if I'm in I do VY in the 150 because otherwise it's too slow. It climbs too slow. In a 172, which has more power, I'll climb a little faster than VY just because I'm not trying to make an altitude in a certain amount of time most of the time, so I don't really care when I get there. I climb at what's called a cruise climb. Cruise climb is just, I'm being very nice to the engine. If in a 172, if best angle or best rate of climb is 74 knots, I'll usually climb at 80 knots because I'm not putting so much heat on the engine. I'm climbing, but I'm still like cooling the engine down enough to where the cylinders are happy, the exhaust gas temperature is not too hot. So it's just babying the engine. Otherwise, VY, VX. And you would only hold VX until you cleared the obstacle, whatever it was. And then you'd go into VY. Those are all on the checklist, so review those before you take off. I'm going to rotate at 60. I'm going to climb out at 76 miles per hour. All right, we did the appropriate checklists. So now we're doing takeoff. We'll do full throttle, check the gauges, make sure they're all in the green, make sure our airspeed's alive. So here we are officially ready to take off. So when you're ready to take off, you switch from ground, you go to tower. You don't have to ask. When you're in the run-up area, go ahead and just put it on the tower. You say Monterey Tower, 61329er, ready for departure, holding short of 28 left on either November or Alpha, wherever you are at. And they might say 61329er, hold short of 28 left for landing traffic. So maybe someone's landing. Okay, hold short of 28 left at November or Alpha. 61329er. Or they'll say 61329er, cleared runway 28 left, cleared for takeoff, right turnout approved. 28 left, cleared for takeoff, right turnout approved, 61329er. So when you're ready for takeoff, you don't say ready for takeoff. You say ready for departure. Only ATC says takeoff because there was an accident, I forget where, but between two airliners. And one airliner said ready for takeoff. One was lined up and waiting. So basically when you line up and wait, you just taxi onto the threshold. You line up on centerline and you just wait until you're cleared for takeoff. Well, they heard the ready for takeoff from the other airplane and they thought that that was their takeoff clearance. They started taking off. And then tower wasn't paying attention. They cleared the other person for takeoff. They took off into each other. Most everyone died. So the FAA wrote in the NTSB report that best practice is instead of saying ready for takeoff, ready for departure. That way no one's confused. Only ATC says takeoff. So ready for departure, 28 left. And then he said right turnout approved. So what they're expecting at a towered airport, they are expecting you to at least be at 400 feet AGL above the ground over the departure end of the runway. Departure end just means you took off on this end. This is your departure end. You should be at least be 400 feet AGL over the departure end before you turn, unless they say otherwise. They might say, hey, turn early, or hey, I'll call your crosswind, because maybe they want you to turn later. They might want you to turn later. Otherwise, if they just say right turnout approved, they're assuming you know 400 feet AGL over the departure end, I am good to go. I can just go ahead and turn. Obviously, if they say that and you know that someone's taking off of the other runway, you can be like, am I clear of the parallel departure traffic? And they will confirm or deny that. But you have to be aware there is another runway next to you. So if you're taking off and they say right turnout approved and you know someone else is taking off, you make sure that you're not going to hit them, no matter what tower says. And also, if you're taking off either runway, if you're taking off to a right or left, if they say fly runway heading, they mean if you're lined up for 28, your runway heading is 280. If you're on 10 right, your runway heading is 100. So if they say take off on runway heading, they're saying hold that heading until they say otherwise. And you need to make sure that you do not drift over to the other run side, and vice versa. If you're on this side taking off, do not drift over to this side. These runways are only separated by about 500 feet. So they're pretty close together. It's up to you to, on takeoff, look behind you, or usually it's easier to look on your inner shoulder and see if the runways are behind you. If it's offset, then you need to move over and make sure you're in front of your runway. And on your takeoff roll, so you taxi on to 28 left. They cleared you for takeoff, so you can just go. Full throttle. Heels are on the floor. Right rudder, probably. You have no flaps in. You're looking all the way down the runway. You're on center line. And you can call these out. You can be like, full throttle, on center line, eyes all the way down the runway. My feet are on the floor. I have some right rudder. Look over to your engine gauges. Oil temperature, oil pressure. They're on this side in the 150. Gauges are green. Airspeed's alive. That means the needle's moving on the airspeed indicator. Airspeed's alive, gauges are green. And then there's 60, rotate. These are all, you can make these call outs. I would. I make these call outs, even if I'm by myself. I'm like, okay, heels are on the floor, I'm on center line, airspeed's alive, gauges are green, there's my rotation speed. That scares me every time. So those are the call outs for the takeoff. And you really want to be looking at your engine gauges because we briefed if any of those are in the red, we're aborting the takeoff. So if you're not looking at them, how are you going to know to abort the takeoff? So you have to glance at them, not fixate, but glance at them. They're in the green.
My instructor, I don't know if this is, he always used to say, you're actually counting to when you're going down the runway before you rotate 1001, 1002, 1003.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, if you know like roughly how long it takes to get to the rotation speed, you could totally do that. You could totally just count. Yeah, this is just a different technique. All right, so now we are airborne. Checking our gauges, checking our airspeed, make sure we're not climbing too slow. Definitely not below VX. VX is already pretty slow, so nothing below VX. If you said you're going to rotate or take off at VY and climb at VY, then you climb at VY. Make sure that that's correct. All right, now you're airborne and you're heading back to McClellan. Okay, now we're going to talk about traffic patterns, which I feel like, was this the one I wanted to go outside for? So traffic pattern operations. This would be something that you guys can look up tonight. It's called Advisory Circular 96. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to move this somewhere where I can actually fit the whole thing. Advisory Circular 9066 Charlie. If you just Google that, it should show up. Advisory circulars are documents published by the FAA. They provide guidance on just different topics. That one specifically is providing guidance on non-towered airport operations. They're not regulatory, which just means that they're not mandatory, they're not regulations, but they are recommended by the FAA. So we should probably follow them. So if we're going over to McClellan, McClellan is non-towered. And we have a big old TFR around right now because there's some firefighting activity going on. I'm going to turn that layer off. McClellan is non-towered. What traffic, so if we're taking off or landing on 16, are we a right traffic pattern or a left traffic pattern? Correct. How do you know? Perfect. Another way of looking is on the chart. It says RP16. Standard traffic patterns are left because they put the runway on your side because you're the pilot flying. So runway should be on your side most of the time. If it's not, it'll be depicted. Right pattern 16 because that's considered non-standard.
So all non-towered or right pattern?
No, not all non-towered. I'm just saying if it's depicted, that means one of the runways is right traffic. Most airports are all left traffic patterns. Yeah, so if it's just depicted RP16, then that's a right traffic pattern for 16, but it's a left traffic pattern for 34. So right pattern 16, left pattern 34. They're keeping us on this side of the runway. Probably because the city's right here. This is a congested area. They don't want us overflying all these buildings, all these houses. The airport's pretty big, so this is like all of the airport surface area. So they're just trying to keep us on this side. And other places will do that because maybe there's terrain on the other side that they don't want you to overfly. Usually it's like residential areas and they don't want you to piss off the neighbors and overfly houses. So they're trying to keep us on the specific side at McClellan. But you need to make sure that you know that it's a right traffic pattern, or any airport you're going to, know the traffic pattern side, know the traffic pattern altitude, the TPA. At McClellan, it's 1,100. It's like 1,077, but 1,100 is what we'll call it. 1,100 at McClellan. It's a right pattern if I'm using runway 16. And how do you determine what runway you're using? Where the winds are coming from. So if the winds were favoring 3-4, it would be something like winds are 330 at 5. Okay, 340 is closest to that, so we must be using 34. McClellan specifically, if you listen to the weather, it says preferred pattern for calm winds is 16. So if it says winds, calm, everyone's using 16. So you would go to 16. If it says winds are variable, I would also go to 16.
So you're getting the weather like four nautical miles out? Or how far do you?
If I'm coming into an airport, I'll get the weather as far out as like 15 miles. I just want to be ready. I want to know what runway everyone's using. So about 15 miles out, I'll start getting the weather. I'll start listening to the CTAF frequency if it's not towered. Otherwise, I'll get the weather. I'll get on with the towered frequency and then start announcing, hey, I'd like to come in. And I'd like to do a full stop, which means I want to land, taxi off the runway, and go park. If I want to do a full stop taxi back, I want to land, pull off the runway, and then taxi back to take off again. If I want to do a touch and go, I'm going to land, touch down, clean everything up, and then take right back off. You'll probably do a lot of touch and goes as students. Usually by yourself, though, if you're soloing, most CFIs, I do it, I'll endorse you for full stops only. Because touch and goes, they're busy. You have to get the flaps back up, you got to turn off the carb heat, you have to make sure you're on center line and make sure that you're at a good speed and no one's, in your way. And it can just get really busy and really fast paced. So I don't like students doing touch and goes by themselves. Then you want to talk about, so the advisor circular tells people how to enter and exit runways, or it at least gives guidance on how to do that. So most of the time, you want to enter on what's called a 45. So if you're right pattern for 16, you would want to come in at a 45-degree angle, aiming for about the middle of the runway, 45-degree angle, and then get on the downwind, and then base final. The reason why is because this angle, it's a lot easier to see who's coming and who's leaving. And also, if you need to get away from the traffic pattern, you're at a better angle to do that. You can do like a 360 and then get reestablished. Or you could just completely abandon the traffic pattern and go somewhere else. If you're coming at a 90-degree angle, that's a harder angle to turn at. And you don't have as great of a visibility of who's coming and who's leaving. So we like the 45. If you're coming from over here, which most of the time we are, there's two ways to do it. If there's no one if it's not too busy, you could just fly over the field at traffic pattern altitude or a little bit higher. I like to come in higher, so I like to come in at 1,500, fly over midfield, and then get on a downwind and start descending. So I would say, McClellan traffic, 61329er, 5 miles east, planning to overfly midfield at 1,500 and enter a midfield right downwind 16. I'm going to overfly midfield at 1,500 and then do a midfield downwind entry and land. Another way to do it is called the teardrop. So in a teardrop, you definitely would overfly at a higher altitude, at least 500 feet above. We're only doing 400 feet above because if you go too high, you're in the Charlie, so you can't quite do 500 feet. The highest really you should go is 1,500. So you'll overfly at 1,500 midfield. You'll continue out about 2 miles. And then if you're going to do a right pattern, you would turn left and enter on a 45. And on that 45, start descending down the TPA from 1,500 and then get on downwind. So it'll look like I should have done that better. If this is the runway, this is 1-6, this is 3-4. You're coming from this way, you're gonna overfly about midfield, continue at least 2 miles away. You wanna get out of the traffic pattern because you're going to do a turn and you might not be able to see people in the turn. So you go 2 miles out or so, and whatever direction the traffic pattern is, you turn the opposite way. So it's a right pattern, you're gonna turn left and do a teardrop. On the 45, now you're on a downwind. So it gets you on a 45 entry, 45-degree angle, and then get on a downwind. I would do that if it was like super busy. Because what happens is if you're overflying midfield, it gives you a chance to oversee who's in the pattern. And then it gives everybody else a lot of time to plan to have you enter. If I do the midfield entry, it's because maybe there's only 1 or 2 people in the pattern and I know I'm not going to hit anyone. But if there's like 5 people in the pattern and somebody's like here and someone's here and someone's here and someone's taking off, I'm like, okay, this is crazy. I'm going to overfly, see where everyone is, get out of the pattern, come in on a 45. You're giving everyone else a lot more time to prepare for you to come in. Some other considerations are crosswinds. So crosswind components, there's a whole bunch of different ways to calculate them. Here's how I do it. So a crosswind is a wind at a 90-degree angle from the runway. So if we're taking off of 1-6, the wind's coming from here, that's a crosswind. It's not a headwind because a headwind would be coming straight at you. Crosswind, it's coming at you across. So a 90-degree angle is a direct crosswind. But a lot of the time, it's not necessarily a direct crosswind. Sometimes it's only like 30-degree difference between you and the runway heading. So if you're taking off of 1-6, the winds are at 1-9 or 0. Okay, that's a 30-degree difference. Not a full crosswind, but not a full headwind either. So if it was 1-9 or 0 at, let's say, 10 knots, you don't get the full headwind component of 10 knots because it's a 30-degree difference between 190 and 160. 160 is your heading if you're taking off of 1-6. The winds are from 1-9 or 0 at 10. We're comparing the crosswind component to the 90-degree angle. At a 90-degree angle, you have 100% crosswind. So if the winds were, what's 90 degrees from 160? 250. If the winds were 250, which would be over here, if the winds were 250 and you're taking off of 1-6, 250 at 10, you have a 10-knot crosswind. As a solo student, you're probably not going that day. But if it's like a 1-9 or 0, okay, 1-9 or 0 at 10, you would take 30% of 10 knots because a 30-degree difference is 1/3 of 90. Does that make sense? A 90-degree difference in runway heading versus wind direction is a full crosswind. So if I'm at 160, I'm on runway 16, I'm lined up 160 on the heading. The winds are coming from 250. 250 is a 90-degree difference for 16. That's a direct crosswind. It's coming straight across. If it's 190, 190 is only a 30-degree difference between 160. So I'm not eating the full crosswind. I'm not eating the full headwind either. So 30-degree difference is 1/3 of 90. So you would take 30% of 10, the wind speed, and that's your crosswind component, which is roughly 3 knots. So you only have a 3-knot crosswind and a 7-knot headwind. If it's a 45-degree difference, 45 degrees is half of 90, so it would be half of the crosswind. The crosswind component, if it was 160 plus 45, so if it was 205 at 10, you would take half of 10, which is 5, and now you have a 5-knot crosswind component and a 5-knot headwind component, and then so on and so forth. when you guys solo, you're going to be given a max crosswind component of like 5 or 6 or 7. So you need to know how to calculate crosswind components. This is how I do it. There's also charts that you can look up, like, I don't know. I don't think the 150 has a chart, so you have to do it like some other way. But there are some crosswind component charts for airplanes in the POH, but I don't think the 150 has one. So this is how I teach it, and this is how I do it. A direct crosswind is a 90-degree difference between the wind and the runway heading. Which again, doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's like 190, it's 180, it's 170. Okay, 170, 10-degree difference, it's essentially all of a headwind. 180, 20-degree difference, pretty much all of a headwind. 190, I'm like, okay, it's a 7-knot headwind if it's at 10 knots. So 0-degree difference, 0 crosswind. It's a headwind. 30-degree difference, you take 1/3 of the velocity of the wind, and that's your crosswind component. If it's a 45-degree difference, you take half of the velocity of the wind, and that's your crosswind component. If it's a 60-degree difference, you take 2/3 of the velocity, and that's your crosswind component. If it's a 90-degree difference, you take the whole thing. So if it's 10-knot speed, you have a 10-knot crosswind. Other things to think about, does that make sense? Okay. Other things to think about, I would write down 91-113 for the regulations, right of way, because you're going to be flying with other planes, other helicopters, a hot air balloon, I don't know. 91-113 lays out the right of way rules and the order. I'll tell you right now, if an airplane is in distress, like an emergency, they have priority over everybody. If you're on fire, engine failure, you are the priority over everyone. The only one that we do not have priority, or that we have priority over as an airplane, is a helicopter. Helicopters, we have the right of way versus a helicopter, so they have to give way to us. Because helicopters are more maneuverable than an airplane, so they can move out of the way a lot easier. Other than that, a glider has right of way over us. A hot air balloon has right of way over us, and I think over everybody, hot air balloons, because they are not maneuverable at all. If you've ever rode on a hot air balloon, they have several different landing spots because it's never guaranteed that they're going to make that landing spot, so you get out of their way. Hot air balloon, glider, can't think of the other ones. But 91-113 will lay them all out. Aircraft in distress has right of way over everyone. And an aircraft on final approach has right of way over anybody on the ground. So if someone's taxiing out on the runway in front of you and you're on short final, you have right of way. They're not supposed to be taxiing out in front of you. That being said, just because you have right of way over someone does not mean that you get to abuse that rule. You do whatever is safe. If doing a go around is the safer option, then you do a go around. Yes, you have right of way because you're landing traffic, but that guy's an idiot and he taxied in front of you. So you're not going to be like, well, I have right of way, so I'm going to land anyway. Just go around. He's stupid. You can establish that. That's fine. But go around. So 91-113. If two planes are converging, like head on, you both turn to the right to avoid each other. So you both turn to the right. If you have an airplane, if you're in the 150 and you have a jet, or I won't say a jet, you have like a King Air behind you, they're a lot faster than we are, so they're probably going to overtake you, which means they're going to pass you by. They have to pass you by on your right side, and you have right of way still, because most likely you can't see them, but they can see you. So like you would have priority technically for landing first, and they have to extend and then come in behind you. That being said, sometimes they overtake you and they cut you off. It happens all the time. You don't abuse your like, well, I have right of way, so I'm also gonna turn base and you can figure it out. No, if they turn base in front of you, keep them in sight, just keep going. Come in behind them, it's not a big deal. It's nothing worth having a midair collision over. So know the rules, but then know it's safe.
Would you then go into slow flight? Just stay behind.
Yeah, I would slow down. You know, king airs are really fast, so most likely if you're here, they'll overtake you and then they'll turn and it won't be an issue. What they're doing is wrong, but you're not going to hit them most likely. But yeah, you can slow down more and then you'll probably have to extend a little bit so that they can come in and land. It happens a lot. So a lot of people they don't know the rules or they just don't care. I mean, I will be sensitive though to the fact that a lot of the time, if it's a king air, they might be medevac, like medical evacuation. So you never know the nature of the patient that's on that plane or helicopter. So if it's a medevac flight, whether or not I have right of way, I usually let them go in front of me because you don't know. You don't know what's going on. So at McClellan, if I'm ready to take off and so is a medevac pilot, but maybe I was there first, I still let them go because, you know, they're trying to save a life. You just don't know. Let's see. So the effects of atmospheric conditions, including wind on takeoff and climb performance. Having a headwind gives you better takeoff and climb performance. Having a tailwind is not good. It will give you a longer takeoff roll, which is not good. The plane is built to fly into a headwind. So you want to take off into a headwind. If it's hot outside, it's going to take you longer to take off. It's going to take you longer to land too. Because if you're landing in hot weather, your true airspeed is faster. Because hot weather, the air molecules are spread farther apart, so there's less drag on the plane. So you're moving through the air at a faster speed than normal. You still aim for the same indicated airspeed on your landings. That doesn't change. But just know, if it's hotter, you're probably going to land a little longer than you're used to. And you're going to take off a little bit longer maybe than you're also used to. For wind shear is a sudden change in direction or velocity of the wind. Wind shear could happen. Low-level wind shear is dangerous. Low-level wind shear means wind shear below, I think, 2,500 feet or 2,000 feet. So if you're taking off and you into a headwind and suddenly that headwind becomes a tailwind, that is wind shear. And that could be dangerous because if you have a tailwind on takeoff, tailwinds tend to make the nose pitch down. So you have to counteract that by probably adding power and pitching up a little bit. Don't just pull the plane up because then you could stall, but be aware you can feel the nose want to just start pitching down and the climb gets a little harder. Okay, add power, pitch up more. It's rare that happens at McClellan, but you have to know about wind shear. It's a sudden change in velocity or direction of the wind, and it can be dangerous if you're low to the ground because it could make the plane do something that you're not expecting. It could also be like a sudden downdraft. Suddenly you feel the plane sinking and you weren't planning on descending that fast. Happens a lot at Auburn because Auburn has a bunch of terrain around it, and so you have wind flowing up and over hills and changing direction constantly. So at some point, you get an updraft on final for Auburn at runway 25, and then right before the threshold, you get a downdraft. So what people will do is they get an updraft, so they cut their power and they nosedive, and then they get the downdraft. Now they're sinking a lot more. So you're going to run into wind shear, and it all sounds like, how the hell am I going to know that that's happening? It just happens with time. It comes with time. It comes with experience. You start to feel the aircraft and you start to know what to expect. And when that does not happen, your CFI is there to help you correct for it. But you just need to know wind shear can be dangerous. And if you're getting a wind shear report, like on the AWAS, or if the AWAS is saying the winds are 160 at 10 knots, winds are variable between 120 and 200. Okay, the wind is coming from either 130 or 200 or somewhere in between. That could be a wind shear situation because the wind is changing direction suddenly. So that's when you kind of start thinking, maybe you shouldn't go that day, or go with the CFI.
So when there's a lot of crosswinds, well, not a lot, but crosswind, you're using your rudders more, right? Isn't the tail part of the plane like really
Yeah, so like if you're so if you're taking off into a crosswind, and let's say that the wind's coming at you from the right side, you would go a right aileron to keep that wing down, because that wind from the right side could kind of lift up your wing prematurely. So you put that wing down with right aileron and your full power. So now you're full power. And as you get more airflow and airspeed, the control surfaces become more effective. So you actually can take out some of that right aileron, because now you don't need as much to get the same correction. So you're on a crosswind takeoff, wind's coming at you, you're all the way to the right, you would slowly take some out, but not all of it, because as soon as you take off, you're going to want to crab into the wind so it doesn't blow you off of the runway. Because you could be flying like this sideways, and your ground track, the track across the ground, like think of where just your movement across the ground, your ground track is straight ahead, but your heading is that way. But that's what a crab looks like. So your ground track can be completely different from whatever your heading is. So you would, right aileron, if the wind's coming from the right, take off, still have some of it in there, but you're not cranking it so much. When it comes to the rudder, kind of depends. Not necessarily. You'll most likely still need right rudder on takeoff anyway, and you really don't want to take off in a cross control like left rudder, right aileron, because now the plane is uncoordinated and more of it's exposed to the wind, and you slow down really fast. You can stall the plane that way. So the rudder kind of stays the same. Yeah, you're always going to need right rudder. Okay, we're going to go outside, and we're going to talk about landing configuration, and I'm going to draw a runway on the ground, and we're going to act like the plane. I guess I'll bring this with me. I also don't know if you can hear me, but that's fine. So, are you guys landing yet? Is anyone landing yet? Sweet. Okay, great. So I'm just going to show you how I teach it. You know, your CFI might completely teach you a different method. But usually what I do is, okay, so here we are, taking off of 1-6, right? So you would taxi on, you would say, McClellan traffic, Cessna 61329er, departing 1-6, staying in the pattern, McClellan. Or right close traffic, McClellan. Taxi, you're on takeoff. Okay, now you're airborne. There's a lot of debate about this. A lot of people call this the upwind leg. Technically, it's the departure leg. Call it whatever you want. I'm not going to tell you what's right or wrong because everyone is mad at each other about it. It's whatever. I call it departure leg. So I'll say I'm on the departure, McClellan traffic, Cessna 61329er, departure leg 1-6, staying in the pattern. Once I'm, at least 500 feet, I'll turn crosswind because in theory, the wind's coming from here, from the road. So it's coming across for me now. So McClellan traffic, Cessna 61329er, right crosswind, 1-6, McClellan. I turn, and then I kind of do it by memory, but do you guys know there's like a building with that looks like a big golf ball. That's a good thing to fly over for your downwind at McClellan, because when you're on your downwind, if you're in a high wing, you have your wing strut, that's that arm that connects to the wing. You want the runway about halfway up the wing strut for your downwind leg. That'll keep you within 3/4 of a mile. So if you were to lose an engine, you can still make the runway with that distance. So McClellan traffic, Cessna 61329er, right downwind, 1-6, McClellan. You could throw in like full stop, touch and go. So right downwind, 1-6, full stop, McClellan. So I'm keeping my spacing right here. What I do is once I'm a beam, once the 1,000-foot markers are directly like off of my shoulder, that's what a beam means, I power back to 2,000. I turn on the carb heat. I do flaps 10. I start a descent. Some people, they do that when they hit the threshold, the numbers. You're not right or wrong. I do it at the 1,000-foot markers because I can descend and turn base closer to the runway if I start earlier. If I start all the way over here, I have to go a little bit farther away from the runway and possibly get out of gliding range. Because as you descend, you get lower. And if you're farther away, you have a less likelihood of making the runway in an engine out situation. So I start here, power 2000, carpet on, flaps 10, descend. And then I turn base leg. Again, I'm keeping the runway within half a wing strut. Right base, McClellan traffic, 329er, right base, 16, full stop, McClellan. Probably right before I turn base, I'll do flaps 20. And I'm still descending. So what happens a lot on a base leg is what I see with students, for whatever reason on the base leg, I think because you're turning and when you're in a turn, the ground looks a little closer than it is. So subconsciously, a lot of students pull up and then they stop descending on the base leg. And then when they turn final, you're too high. And then you can get unstable because now you're trying to dive at the runway. So include the vertical speed indicator in your scan more, especially on the base leg. You should be descending at about 500 feet per minute. I wouldn't do more than like a 700 feet per minute descent because that could be a little squirrely, it could be uncomfortable for your passengers, and it's just not, it's a bad habit. You're kind of diving at the ground at that point. So no more than 700 feet per minute. You're on your base leg, flaps 20, check to make sure no one's sneaking in on the final approach because people do that and they don't talk. So you're clearing left, clearing right before you continue into the final approach path. You're in a descent, the VSI says you're descending. And if I need to, I'll do 30 degrees of flaps before I turn final or like right after I turn final. So now I'm on final, 16, full stop, McClellan. And then at this point, I would say when you're on the final approach, you should be about 500 feet above the ground at that point, and then you just continue descending. And your goal for the most part is to land like on or before the 1,000-foot markers. If you land farther than that, that's okay. You got plenty of runway. But as you get like better at landing, you're kind of aiming for the 1,000-footers. You'll get into like short field landings and soft field landings. So different types of landings for different situations. Obviously, McClellan's not a short field, so you wouldn't really need to do a short field landing. However, sometimes you'll be at an airport and you'll have intersecting runways. So this runway crosses over to this side, and now you have an intersecting runway. So you could do a short field landing if you're on a short runway, obviously. I highly recommend, if you and your CFI are comfortable, to try Rio Linda, the airport that's right to the west of McClellan. It's like a 2,500-foot runway, 40 feet wide. It's very short. Great experience, as long as you're comfortable. So you would use short field landings and takeoffs for like a runway like that. Or if you have to land with an intersecting runway and do something called a lasso, LAHSO, land and hold short operation. ATC has to ask you if you can accept a lasso clearance. You can always say unable if you're not comfortable. Because what they're asking you is, can you land on 3-4, for example, and be able to hold short of the crossing runway? This will shorten your runway distance by who knows. You can check the chart supplement on that airport on ForeFlight specifically to see, it usually would say lasso operations because it'll tell you if you're landing on 3-4, now you have, 3,000 foot of runway distance. So then now you know, okay, can I land at 3,000 feet? For sure, I could do that. Okay, I can accept a lasso clearance. If you don't know, you can always ask ATC. Like, hey, what's the landing distance if I accept? And they'll tell you. And if you're comfortable, for sure, you can say, yeah, I can accept a lasso clearance. And if you don't, then you don't accept it. They might tell you have to go around. They might have to vector you somewhere else because they're letting someone else land on the other runway. That's okay. If you can't do it, then you can't do it. And I would never expect a student or anybody to accept it if they weren't comfortable with that. You have to know for sure, I can land and stop within 3,000 feet. Or, whatever it is. So you could do a lasso, for example, and that's only if you have like an intersecting runway somewhere. Right now the wind is coming. Where is the wind coming from? It's like kind of variable. I feel like it's coming from this way. I'm like trying to feel it. So in this case, I would take off on 3-4, and this is a left pattern. So departure leg 3-4, left crosswind 3-4, left downwind 3-4. I think 3-4 also has 1,000-foot markers, so you would have these. And then same thing. I'm on 3-4. I cut the power to 2,000 because usually I'm at like 2,400 RPM on the downwind. Cut it to 2,000, carb heat on, flaps 10, descend. Make sure everything's clear. No one's coming in or sneaking out. Turn base, left base 3-4. Make sure the runway is clear. And you're going to hear like, hey, don't turn base leg until the numbers are like a 45-degree angle off your shoulder. For sure, that is one way of thinking about it. But the runway can be 34 degrees off your shoulder, but you're still too high. So what I say is 45 degree off your shoulder, and in your window, the runway should be like halfway up your window before you turn base. If it's lower than that, you're too high. If it's above that, you're probably too low. And you have to be comfortable adjusting to the situation. If you're too high, then okay, extend your downwind. Take more time to descend before you turn base. Don't turn base and try to make it work on final. Just keep going. Or if you're too low, okay, turn earlier than you normally would because you're too low. And then maybe halt your descent. Stop descending until you turn final. So you have to adjust to the situation. You know, there's not really a one size fits all for landing. Unfortunately, I wish there was. The formula changes based off of the winds and it's based off of the day. If you're too high or if you're too low, or if there's someone that is landing and for whatever reason they're taking forever on the runway. If they're landing long, that means that like on 1-6, you have taxiway kilo like right here somewhere. A lot of airplanes go to park over there. So they'll say like landing on 1-6, landing long. So they're not going to land here. They're going to land all the way down here. So you need to give them more spacing before you land. Whether that means extending your downwind or cutting the power and going slower on your downwind. They're trying to give you a heads up, like I'm going to take longer on the runway, so give me space. If they're doing a full stop, you would give them more space than you would like if they were doing a touch and go. Touch and goes are fast. They'll get off the runway fast. If they're doing a full stop, who knows what taxiway they're going to make. So give them more time to taxi off of the runway so that you don't have to encroach on them or possibly like have to do a go around that you weren't planning on. Yeah, does that make sense? If you're landing on 1-6, so that means the wind's coming from the road. So this would be a headwind. If the wind's coming from like, let's say like 130, it's coming from like right over here. 130 degrees, there's the wind. I'm taking off. It's a slight crosswind from the left. I'll put in some left aileron. So I have the yoke this way, just a little bit. It's not too intense. So I'll have the left yoke in on the roll. I slowly take some of that out. And now I'm in the air and I'm flying this way. I'm going this way, but I'm aiming towards the wind. Or vice versa, wherever it's coming from. So yeah, you're flying sideways. Good? Questions? Are you guys doing radio calls yet? Yeah? Okay. Do you have any questions on the radio calls? Anything that's confusing? Do you guys say upwind or departure leg? Okay. Most people do. Sometimes I kind of switch back and forth. I'll say upwind. Sometimes it's departure leg. It's like, so technically, here's what the FAA says. So here's your base. Here's your downwind. So the wind's coming from the road. So here's your downwind. Your downwind because the wind is at your back and it's pushing you. And your base leg is just another crosswind, but you're calling it base because it comes before final. But otherwise, here's your crosswind. And then the FAA is saying, this is your upwind. Because if you turn base, you're gonna land. Someone's not paying attention and they roll onto the runway ahead of you, you have to go around. When you go around and they're taking off underneath you, I don't want to be on top of them. Do you understand why I would not go to the right? Because now I'm in the downwind traffic in their way. I would go to the dead side, aka the upwind. So it's like a final approach, but it's offset. So now I'm going into the wind, so upwind. So technically this is the upwind, not over here. This is your departure leg, even though you might be staying in the pattern. So that's why I would say on the departure leg, 1-6, staying in the pattern. If I'm doing a go around, someone's taking off underneath me, I'll sidestep to the dead side, and I'll be like, Cessna 61329er going around 1-6 on the upwind. I have departing traffic in sight. I don't know if I don't know what they're doing. I'm going to say, are you departing the area? What direction are you going in? And then maybe they're going to be like, I'm going to make a left cross and departure. Okay, that's a problem because I'm over here and they want to go this way. So then you establish, okay, do you have me in sight? And they might be like, yes or no. If they don't, I would just say, I'm going to maybe do a left 360. Give them some time so they can climb and they can turn. Or if I'm far enough behind them, I'll slow down. Or if I'm high enough, I could do a midfield right downwind entry as long as no one's over here. Be like, okay, I'm going to cross behind you and do a midfield downwind entry for 1-6. And then that way they're going this way, I'm going this way. But if someone's on downwind or like on a 45 entry to 1-6, and then you got the takeoff traffic, I don't really want to go that way because now I'm their problem. So I would do the 360. I'd turn around, come back, maybe they're already there, and then I could get on my crosswind and then back on my downwind.
But that's considered a non-tower, right? Because if it was a tower,
yeah,
they would tell them to climb to or tell you to climb to.
Exactly.
Or remain at 6,000.
They'll tell everybody what to do. Okay. Yeah, I mean, they probably would, hopefully, they wouldn't have cleared them to take off anyway. But if they made a mistake, and they did, you would go around. Whether tower tells you to or not, you can always go around. Sometimes they will tell you, but if you have to go around because you have to go around, then you do it. But you do your go around, and then they might tell you, hey, do a left 360. To that takeoff traffic, maybe turn an early crosswind behind me. Yeah, tower will sequence it.
So where would you enter on the 45 degree if you weren't doing it?
So if I'm on 1-6, yeah, about like right here, my 45, because it's like if I was at a 90, I'd be like going this way. But I'm coming at a 45. I'm aiming for the middle of the field, but I'm coming in at a much shallower angle, and then I go downwind. If I'm doing the teardrop, I would overfly. I would continue 2 miles, and because it's a right pattern, I would turn to the left and get established on a 45 that way. Or if there's no one there, or it's just like not that busy, you could just go middle of the field, downwind. So those are the entries we talked about. Yeah.
If you have parallel runways, how do you have like a traffic pattern? Because if it's like left side, then one runway is going to, like the traffic pattern is going to be going over the runway and vice versa.
Yeah. So like
left side always prevail?
Most of the time. So like if you had a runway here, so that would be 1-6. Let's say this is 1-6 right, and then this is 3-4 left, and then this is 3-4 right, and this is 1-6 left. If you're both on 3-4, they will most likely make this 3-4 a right pattern. So you're on this side, and then over here it's a left pattern, so you're away from each other. If you go to Mather, they have parallel runways, and that's how they do it. They have 2 runways. I think it's 2-2 left and 2-2 right, 2-2 left. So 2-2 right is a right pattern. 2-2 left is a left pattern. So you're turning away from each other. I'm out of breath. Okay. Any situations you guys have been in that you're like, what the hell happened here? Happens a lot. Like, you're like, this guy did this, we did this, I don't know why.
Well, I just had this one guy. He would start turning crosswind like 2 3. He wasn't even off the runway, so we would be making our downwind call, and then he would have just taken off and then started making his downwind call right behind us. But it's just like kind of.
He's like, he's turning crosswind early.
Yeah, way early.
Yeah, so what the advisory circular says is that you should turn when you're 300 feet below TPA. So in our case, that would be like 800 feet. However, in the 150, to climb to 800 feet, that takes you like all the way out here. It takes you really far. It takes a long time. So in the 150, I make an exception and I say 500 feet. 500 feet because it's higher than like what a towered airport would require. But at 500 feet in the 150, I can stay within 3/4 of a mile of the airport and possibly land on it if I had to. So 500 is like the sweet spot for a 150. If I'm in a 172, I will do the 300 feet below TPA because I can climb a lot faster in a 172. So I would go up to 800 feet and then turn crosswind, climb to my TPA, and then turn downwind. Again, in the 150, it takes too long to do that. So 500 feet is good. If they're turning at like 200, 300 feet, that's like too early. But at the same time, it's like, you know what? If they want to do things and be unpredictable and unsafe, that's on them. Being predictable is being safe. So that's why we like to follow the guidance provided by the FAA, because if we all do the same thing, we all know what to expect from each other, we can work a lot more, there's a lot more better synergy. But not everybody does. And that's, you know, those are the people you run into, unfortunately. All right, it's getting hot and it's too bright, so let's go back inside. All right, now we're back inside. Ooh, my phone is real hot. Okay. Some things I recommend practicing with your CFI are rejected takeoffs. Because I just don't think that they're emphasized enough. So a rejected takeoff, you could do it several different ways. You could just do it like on the roll, you reach rotation speed, and then your instructor says abort. Get on throttle idle, get on the brakes. You don't need to slam on them because it's McClellan or wherever, as long as it's long enough. You don't need to slam on them, like, you know, be nice. But get on the throttle, get on the brakes, pull off the runway. It could be like, oh, there's a bunny crossing the runway. There's a coyote. There's an airplane taxiing and crossing the runway. They didn't say anything. So practice aborted takeoffs. And if your CFI is comfortable, practice an aborted takeoff where you've already taken off and then you have to come back down and land. At McClellan, you can definitely do that. You climb up to, like, you know, usually like, I won't do the exercise over 50 feet. I'll take off, we'll climb 50 feet, and I'll pull the engine. And I'm on the controls with the student in this case because what's it called? The initial reaction is to pull up, and you don't want to do that. You need to push down. And it needs to be a strong push, like a push down to where your butt lifts up out of the seat. You push down and you land back on the runway. So I would practice those with your CFI when you're at that comfort level, because you never know when you need to do it, and I don't think people practice it enough. Too many times people force the takeoff, and too many times they approach a takeoff or a landing with the expectation that it's going to happen. You need to change your mindset to being like, if I land the plane, it's a great day. I'm going to plan to go around. I'm going to plan to do an aborted takeoff. And if I don't have to, cool. But you get in the mindset of expecting the worst. So in that way, you're prepared for the worst. So don't ever expect like, oh, I'm landing the plane and I'm going to make it work. I am in the traffic pattern, setting up for a landing. I'm planning to do a go around. If anything doesn't look right, if I get to land, awesome. Don't force anything. Don't force anything to work on a takeoff or on a landing. Especially on a takeoff, I feel like it happens more often because we get a little bit more complacent on takeoff. On landings, we're a little bit more vigilant because you're landing a plane. On takeoff, though, I feel like because, oh, well, I'm still on the ground, you feel a little bit more safe and then you get complacent and you don't see the animal crossing the runway ahead of you. You don't see the airplane that just taxied onto the runway, or whatever's going on. And we get complacent on the takeoff, and then we don't remember how to do aborted takeoffs because we don't practice them. So practice aborted takeoffs. Practice takeoffs where simulated, the airspeed's not coming alive, because that happens. Sometimes a bug gets in there that you didn't see on the pre-flight. Sometimes there's just an issue with the gauge and it's just not working. So practice aborted takeoffs, rejected takeoffs, whatever you want to call them. Make your radio calls as appropriate. Legally, you don't have to, but you should. I forgot to mention out there. So, the FAA wants me to talk about stabilized approach concepts, which is talking about energy management. And I was kind of talking about that outside. So you have two types of energy. You have potential and you have kinetic. Potential energy is your altitude, because you could potentially use your altitude to get down and gain airspeed. Or if you need to slow down, you could gain altitude by pitching up and lose airspeed if you need to. Kinetic energy is your airspeed. Sometimes you trade one for the other. If you're too high and too slow, you could pitch down and fix both problems, because you're too high, so you have to get down, and you're too slow. Pitching down increases your airspeed. Vice versa. Sometimes I'll come in and I'm like, I'm too low and too fast. I'll trade some of my kinetic energy, some of my airspeed, by pitching up to slow down and to stop my descent or to climb. So there's a trade-off. So in terms of managing your energy, sometimes you might be in the traffic pattern and you didn't realize it, but you were too low. You were at 900 feet versus 1,100. Okay. If you're already abeam the numbers or the 1,000-foot markers, there's no need to climb 200 feet just to come back down. Just know, okay, I am starting this pattern, or I'm starting my descent lower than I usually do. I'll still descend at this point, but I won't go as far as I usually do, because I'm already lower than I normally am. So I'll turn my base leg a little earlier and keep my descent in, but that way I start earlier and I still end, at 500 feet above the ground when I'm on final. Or vice versa. If you're too high, sometimes people are too high. You're at 1,300 feet or 200 feet too high. Okay, either start your descent earlier than you usually do. So if I start at the 1,000-foot markers, maybe I'll start a little bit further back to compensate for the extra 200 feet that I have. Or I'll extend my downwind leg. Be like, I need to take more time to descend, so I will go out a little bit farther than I usually do so I can descend more. Or I'll put flaps in earlier, or I'll cut back the power more than I usually do. You kind of just got to find your rhythm and what you're comfortable with. If you think, some people are worried by extending, now you're at a glide distance from the runway. Okay, well then put your flaps in earlier to help you get down faster. If you don't normally do flaps 20 until base leg, we'll do flaps 20 on your downwind leg to help you lose the altitude. But now you're losing the altitude, but now you don't have to go so far, and you can still turn base leg at your normal place. So there's different things that you can use for managing your energy. You can use geometry. Do you go out farther? Do you cut your base leg short? Do you extend your base leg? You can use flaps. You can also use something called forward slips. Have you guys done that yet? Forward slips are, if the wind's coming from here, I would do aileron into the wind and opposite rudder. If it's coming from here, I would do aileron into the wind, opposite rudder, and you push. And usually the forward slip is full deflection to the left and then full rudder opposite, and then you're pushing down. You have to push, because if you just do cross controls like that, you're turning the plane more into the wind. Your pitot tube's not going to be accurate reading your airspeed, because the wind's coming at you from here, the relative airflow, it's not going into the pitot tube. So your airspeed's inaccurate. And you're exposing more surface area to the wind, which increases drag. So you could stall the plane if you don't push enough. So you have to push on a forward slip, And the purpose of a forward slip is to get down quickly without increasing your airspeed. So you're looking like this and you're just getting down really fast. And you just do that until it looks about right. Until the runway is in the same spot that it usually is when you're on a stable approach. So practice rejected takeoffs, practice forward slips. Some people get really uncomfortable with forward slips. I love them. I think they're fun. And really just the key is you have to push. People forget to push all the time. Your airspeed bleeds off real fast with a forward slip. So practice those because those are great tools to get down in a pinch without getting too fast. That being said, you have these tools, you have geometry, you have flaps, you have forward slips. Don't use those to force something to work. If you can forward slip comfortably to get down and make it work, cool. If you're too high and you're not comfortable forward slipping, just go around. So you figure out your comfort level, you figure out your limitations. It's like, am I comfortable doing this or not? You can always go around. That's always the other option. Make sure you're completing your checklists. If you're doing a 45-degree entry, usually once I'm like on a 3-mile 45, I'll do a descent checklist. And then once I'm in the downwind, I'll do like a quick flow, like a Seagumps flow. I'll check the carb heat, I'll check the gas, make sure the wheels are down, put the mixture in where it needs to be, check the power setting, turn on the switches, like the lights, the seatbelts are on. And then I might do a quick Seagumps check on final approach if I have time. But checklist on the 45, Seagumps on the downwind. That way I'm double checking myself. Make sure I have everything done. I think that was all I had. You guys you're all landing now? Or working on them? Not yet? Okay. What are you doing right now?
Stalls.
Ooh,
That's what we
fun.
just did.
Okay. So, okay, cool. So stalls are important because you're most likely to stall in the traffic pattern. So keep up with that. I mean, and you're doing takeoffs though.
Yeah.
Okay. Practice rejected takeoffs. Once you get into landings, then you could talk about forward slips and such. And you're with Cicely, so I'm sure she'll get into that. You're doing landings. Are you pretty close to solo, or what do you think?
I don't know. She said I've like totally got like the pattern down.
Cool.
But, I think that there's like still things I need to work on, but like I'm aware of it. So
Okay, great.
it should be soon.
Cool. Okay, and you've done forward slips. Have you done rejected takeoffs?
No.
Okay, do some of those. Just because you could be soloing and you have to reject a takeoff, so practice it. You're doing forward slips. Just make sure you're good with those. You're comfortable with those, and make sure you're comfortable reaching out to other pilots. Because if they're doing something that you don't know what they're doing, be comfortable reaching out and asking. Like, hey, to the traffic on final, what are your intentions? Or hey, do you, if you're on a crosswind and someone's on a 45, hey, to the 45 traffic, do you see me on crosswind? And they might be like, no, I don't see you. Okay, I'm gonna extend my crosswind and just come in behind you. Be comfortable having those conversations. Yeah, just be comfortable talking to other pilots and figuring stuff out together. Because a lot of the time I see people, they're like on a converging course and no one's talking. No one's saying like, I'll do a 360, or are you gonna extend, or hey, I'll extend. They're just kind of going at each other and no one's saying anything. I saw that happen today. And then I reached out because I saw it all happening and I was like, I am not gonna witness a midair right now. So I was like, hey, to this tail number and this tail number, you guys are on a converging course. Do you guys see each other? And this guy was like, yeah, I have the downwind traffic in sight. I was just going to come in behind him. Okay, well, no one knew that because he didn't say anything. And so I'm going to say something because I feel like it's my responsibility, not just as a pilot, but like I'm a flight instructor. So if I see a problem, I don't care what level you're at. I don't care if you've been flying longer than me. If you're not talking, I don't know what you're thinking. So I want my students before they solo to be comfortable doing stuff like that. I want you to almost be like a freaking tower controller up there and talk to people, see who's thinking what, who's going to do what, and if they're not going to do it, you need to be comfortable doing it. If they're coming in on a crosswind and you're on a left 45 and they're not saying anything, okay, then you do the 360 and get out of the way and let them go. Or if you're on a crosswind and they're on a 45 and they're not saying anything, okay, you're going to extend your crosswind and then just come in behind them. Do you have right of way? Yes. But they obviously don't care. So you have to save your own life and theirs and do what you think is going to be the safest option. And then, of course, you're going to have people who are going to be like, I had you in sight. You didn't need to do that. And it's like, well, you didn't freaking say anything. So trust nobody, pretty much. There are people out there who are flying and they should not be. But, like I said the first lesson, you guys are in your safest bubble right now because you're students. You're flying with somebody. You're learning step by step how to do things properly. And you're, of course, going to be more paranoid as a student. And I hope you carry that with you. And always remember, at one point you were a student. Sometimes I forget, and I have to remember, at one point I was a student, and I was a lot more paranoid. I'm more confident now, but hopefully that doesn't mean I'm complacent or anything. Yeah, so before you solo, make sure you're comfortable talking to other people. And you don't have to use, aviation jargon. You can just talk in plain English. Hey, what are you doing? Traffic on base. Did you see that you cut me off? And they'll be like, no. I'm like, yep, I thought so. Okay. Move on. Happens all the time. Try not to get upset on the radio. People, I have no problem calling people out on the radio, but I've heard other people call people out and they're, yelling. That's not conducive either. You don't need to argue on the frequency. If you guys want to discuss this, meet up on the ground somewhere and talk it out. No arguing on the frequency, no yelling on the frequency, because it's just uncomfortable and it can throw other people off. So, no cursing on the frequency. Heard that before too. It's like, oh my God. Someone called another person an asshole. I'm like, okay, this is not the place to be doing that. And you can report people for doing that, or you could be reported for doing that. But ultimately, I want you to be comfortable talking to other people because I need to know, and your CFI wants to know, that you are confident, you're safe, you have situational awareness, and you're not going to let anyone kill you. And you're not going to kill yourself. On that note, any questions on your takeoffs, your landings, your tower to airport stuff, radio calls, Monterey? Monterey is a definite must if you're doing cross countries, whether with a CFI or after you get your certificate. It's such a great airport. And sometimes they have crew cars available, which are for free, and the FBO will just be like, yeah, you can have the crew car. You just have to bring it back usually by 9 p.m. But you can go drive to Carmel or what's it called? Cannery Row in Monterey. So fun. It's a fun place to go. It's a fun place to take people to. But then you have to consider that Monterey is along the coast. It usually gets foggy, so you usually can't really get in there before 12 p.m. and then you have to get out of there probably by 6 p.m. depending on the season. Right now you could probably be there longer, but take that into consideration. Any coastal flying. Sweet. Well, there were no slides today. But I will put this in the texts in the the WhatsApp. Just I'll send you guys the actual PDF. Feel free to take a picture of this, or if you already wrote it down, cool.
For my trip, since I'm gonna be missing.
Oh yeah.
Well, luckily, only one lesson.
Yeah.
The universe worked out great for that. I'm taking an iPad Mini and I'm just gonna download a bunch of stuff on it to study.
Perfect.
So what can you recommend?
That's a great question. I have so many things.
Well, so we're driving a lot, and so because we're